Welcome to The Lost Signals Discusses Film and TV. Using the revolutionary Manzur-Ramosi Thurlow scale,
or MONS,
we scrupulously review these art forms with an emphasis on narrative structure. Join us for another entertaining episode.
Hello, and welcome back to The Lost Signals Discusses Film and Television. I am Chris Morgan, your host. I am here tonight with Jonathan Ian Manzur.
Hello.
Scott Thurlow.
Bombs over Baghdad.
Oh my God.
And, Jesus Christ. Stephen Ramosi.
Hi.
And tonight we're going to review a film. It's currently on Netflix. It's a 2016 film called Under the Shadow. It's directed by Babak Avari. I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. And does anybody have a funny log line?
I mean, I think I kind of just said it like you guys weren't expecting that. So yeah, I guess we'll get into it in plot, but it's set in Tehran and during the crisis, which also and horror things also happen on top of them dealing with the fallout.
Are you just doing Ian's part?
I was going to say, are you doing plot?
No, I thought you were. Oh, sorry. You were doing for Longman. That's my log line. Pretty much what I said.
Hilarious.
Fantastic.
Sorry. It's
Ian,
more or less that, and you'll flesh it out anyways.
Ian, would you like to tell us the plot of this film then?
Yeah. So it's 1980s during the Iran-Iraq War. It takes place in Tehran, bombs over Tehran. And basically a resentful mother and her weird daughter are stuck in an apartment as the husband goes off to war. And it turns out that jinn are real, or Postmaster Store is real, however you want to look at that. And the jinn is plaguing this family as it tries to possess the little girl. And it's basically the Babadook in Iran. But yeah, that's the plot of this. And it's fairly well done. I actually think the themes and the world they built are better than the narrative. It's a fairly standard ghost story, a haunting, and yeah, so I think it's a fairly decent rendition of a classic story, and so probably getting it too.
Yeah, I would generally agree. So Chris, this is technically your pick, like you suggested it, and yeah, while I was more or less engaged throughout watching this film, I might not necessarily remember it, maybe in a lesser extent than other films recently, but narratively wise, I'm probably going to give it a 2. It was strong enough, and yes, I think the strength of this film comes out in other questions, but as far as the plot unfolds, I'm going to give it, I think I'm looking at least a fairly solid, respectable 2. So,
Steve?
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think that as you guys have said, the story is pretty well paced, and it's easy to follow. There's nothing confusing about it, and there's no cringy parts to me in terms of the way that the plot follows along. I think that it is it's a standard ghost story, but it's a well done standard ghost story. So I think I'll give it a strong 2 in terms of plot. I think if this had a couple of more interesting elements or twists, I might have given it a 3, but it did kind of stick to that template, I guess, of a ghost story. So I'm going to stick with a 2.
Yeah, I overall agree. It's going to get a really strong 2. I probably would have been leaning more. I agree with you, Steve. There was 1 or 2 months. I mean, don't get me wrong. I love this movie. I'm going to say it right now. But I think that I'd have more to say on the narrative and themes and what it would. So I agree with you guys. I'd give it a strong 2 as well.
I just want to make this comment that the character work in this movie is very well done. generally that first act when they're introducing the characters can be the make or break for a boring horror film or in a horror film in general. Difference between a good one and a bad one, and they do the character work very well. I cared about almost everyone involved with this, and they built a really strong world. It's just that, not that I'm expecting a twist or anything. It's just a fairly formulaic ghost story from then on, but it hits all the beats that I wanted to make an interesting film.
Yeah, I agree. And yeah, because I mean, speaking just narratively, that's because it's strong on character, and I think Scott, you will tell us about the themes.
Yeah, so I think that I as I just intone like might be one of, if not the strongest factors of this film, because it does touch like for like how shall I put it, about 60% of the film, like there's no ghost, like there's no like haunting monster. It's just like a family dealing with what's happening at the set in the time, like a mother and a daughter like experiencing like dealing with their daily life, which as the backdrop is missiles, the bombing of the city is happening. So like that's some intense stuff. And also like her story, sorry Steve, what's the mother's character's name?
Shade or Shade.
Right? So like
It's her name.
the very one of the very first scenes is like her trying to go back to university and like being like, oh sorry, you're on the wrong side of politics, like you're the radical left, and we're not gonna let you in. And like, and also her dealing with being a woman in that time and place, and with like the culture, the cultural revolution. So I think all that stuff was like really well handled. And yeah, like it's funny, like I'm sorry, E, I'm gonna steal something from you. Like some of the ghost story stuff was like the least interesting parts of this film. Like I kind of like the fact that like it definitely touched upon those, like a commentary upon that thing, like about her station, like her, and so she wants to be a doctor, like essentially, like she's studying to be like medical school, and her husband is a doctor, and like they sort of have a fallout between each other, a fight, and then he gets drafted and like is basically shipped on a war for the rest of the movie, and like, and that also was part of her character, like she, it's in the back of her mind the whole time while she's trying to deal with like her daughter's, like what's happening with her daughter, and like I guess like the supernatural stuff at the very end as well. So yeah, like all I'm saying is like all that to say, I think themes handled it pretty damn well and covered a number of issues that were relevant and meaningful, and that made sense of the characters. So
Yeah, I think that this is the true star of the show here. The themes, like her not being able to go back to school is what's really haunting her in this movie, right? Like, say that as kind of a joke, but like it really is the case. You've got that. You've got her trying to hold on to her home life while her husband is away at war. In a dangerous area, and the few communications that they're even able to have are like very staticky and short, and she's not really able to communicate with her husband, who she's already having a tough time with before he goes away. So you've got that going on. You've got her relationship with her daughter, which is really complex and like done in a really good way. Like, they clearly like absolutely need one another and love one another, but at the same time you see their fights and you see the like tension between them, and you see her like lash out at her daughter, sometimes to try and protect her, sometimes just because she's angry or whatever. And like it really shows a lot of like the different shades of being a parent and being a kid in that relationship. And I think that this movie does a great job of showing that type of stuff. Like you said, the ghost story is almost secondary to anything else that's happening in this. It's just like a reason to tell this story about this family, kind of. And yeah, I think they do a great job with that. So,
well, my favorite part of the ghost angle is when the Jin preys upon her insecurities, and it makes manifest all of the worries in her head. So she doesn't have to tell it. She doesn't have to go to the audience. I'm feeling upset right now. It's the monster that's preying upon that. Her insecurities as a mother. Her insecurities as a adult in this very conservative world. Actually, one of my favorite scenes is when, and she makes all the right moves in a lot of this. Once she realizes,
Yep.
like, she's like, "We're out of the house." She leaves, and the fucking militia comes up, and like,
Mhm.
"Nah, you're a woman without a headdress. You're going to jail, and then go back home." And she can't be like, "Hey, there's a monster."
Monsters are also in my
there.
house.
No, it's
Yeah, I'm
but,
glad that she didn't try to convince them that there was a monster, like a ghost in her house, because
Yeah.
like you realize as a rational person, no one's gonna believe you. So just like let it,
and nor would they really care because they're more interested in their ideology than they
Right.
are in protection.
What the
But
gins are existing.
yeah. But it's a fascinating character study of this woman in a tough situation, made worse by monsters. So, also, as in many of these movies, always listen to the crazy old woman, religious fanatic who's warning you of the monsters.
Who knows what's up?
Yeah.
sure.
Um, I I have to say that I loved as I think Ian pointed out what the gin contributed to this. This actually was able to bring you outside the character and speak to a lot of her insecurities, which is great. And but uh, in I liked how they worked in the lore of the gin and everything, but I can't get over the fact that every time there was an air raid siren, I got chills. I got the, I mean, because
You're on PST.
yeah, growing up in the 70s and 80s, I mean, as I told you guys precast, and I probably said on this cast many times, even hearing like if you're in a strange town, you don't not used to what their like 6 o'clock fire alarm is, like all of a sudden you jump. So the film had me on pins and needles anyway. Then when you started bringing in the gin, and I and the gin is interesting, and I guess I'm going to touch upon this when I get to Antagonist. But what I really loved was at the ending, because with the gin, he takes something from you, to kind of keep a possession of you, so you can never let he can never let you go, you can never let him go. And the mother and daughter escape, and this is spoilers, but the book that her mom had given her and signed, and the head of her daughter's doll were left back in the apartment, which goes to the whole, well, whether or not that, I kind of, some part of me wishes they had kind of left the supernatural element a bit more opaque as to whether it was
I agree
real
with that.
or whether it was thematic. But that last scene where they show that, like, still gives me goosebumps, because whether it is a gin or whether it is war or both, there's always something left behind. There's always part of you left behind. There's always part of you that you're not going to be able to escape from any situation. And that, to me, when I saw that, even though themes was getting going up until then, I just can't stress what an incredibly powerful ending this was. I mean, because let's face facts, we've all seen films where it's great, and then you get to the ending, you're like, oh, why? If you had cut the film like 2 minutes earlier, it would have been a better film. I mean, this ending was the perfect cherry on top. So I'm definitely giving themes a very strong one.
Right on. Yep, I feel you.
Agree.
And that leaves me with Antagonist. And this is really interesting because you do have the Jinn, who's an antagonist.
Speaking of,
This isn't opaque. They're pretty. You do know there's a Jinn around, and the Jinn does contribute to the themes, I think, as Ian established, and it really gives you a good perspective. But I kind of like the Jinn carrying on to the thematic elements as a proxy for the world around it. Because
I get what you mean.
because the Jinn is born of this kind of thing. I mean, it does prey upon you at your weakest, when you're the most needy, and this situation is that. It is right, is the right situation. So on the one hand, yeah, I think the Jinn is kind of a genie. The Jinn was a good antagonist, but I liked him as an antagonist, but I also liked him as a symbol for all the other things that were antagonizing this family, this woman, in the world. So I'm definitely going to give him a 1. Excuse me, because I felt like the Jinn served more, again, to call back to themes, than just being a specter.
If I may,
Please.
I agree with you. I agree with you in terms of what you just said. The Jinn is like a callback to war, but you keep calling the Jinn a him, but it was only portrayed as a woman throughout the entire movie, as far as I remember.
Twice as a man, once as
It
a
did flip.
female. And
What do you mean once as a female? Every time it was a woman talking to her daughter every time, right?
yeah, that's the once as a female.
That's what
I'll
she
get
said
into
about
that. in-
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
I'm also gonna. As far as calling it a him, I'm sorry. Andrew Didoff in Wishmaster, he was a Jinn. He was the first Jinn cinematic Jinn I counted.
I did mention Wishmaster like as a,
Okay,
sort
no,
of-
we'll
as-
talk
as-
about that.
as
Ian,
a-
we'll let Ian talk about
Let's
that.
call it Nate. So yeah.
But so anyway, as far as that goes, I think you're absolutely right. It's like the Jinn as the specter of war, as almost delivered by a missile strike, right? That's when it kind of mostly manifests.
up.
And like I think that it absolutely is that's what the movie's trying to do, and I think that it does a really good job of that, as turning this like concrete but like ungraspable concept of this war, and like what it is to an entire country, what it is to every single person in that country, and things like that, and making it an aspect of this life, and then imposing through that this like non-concrete but very specific like monster that is only that is going after these two, and specifically the daughter Dorsa. So I think it's a really fascinatingly kind of complex antagonist in this movie, and I love what they did with it. And I think that's really cool. So, Ian, I'm interested. I don't
Do you want to go first?
I don't exactly recall the it's manifesting as a man, but I will, I'm sure, momentarily as soon as you talk about it. So
I'll let Scott go
I
first.
mean,
then.
yeah, like
All
they
right.
mentioned like the door. So the door is like I saw an old lady, like which essentially is supposed to be like the apparition of the Jinn. But
Mhm.
like it's it's not funny, but like I kind of was almost maybe initially going to the question with the zero, only because the fact that like to me it was tied into themes, and like maybe upon retrospect the movie sort of like kind of makes it clear that jinns also like this supernatural thing exists, but also it's like basically just as you guys said a representation of the stress and the trauma of living through those times, and especially like a war torn city that and trying to protect your family. So like I guess at the end of the day, given that, like I may end up giving it like a fine 1, but like certainly the mother and daughter Sheena, sorry, Siva.
Shida
And Dorsa is her daughter. Yes, they felt they were antagonized by some force, whether actual real like psychologically like a real thing, or and also like in maybe like as I talk it out, it's almost like reinforced where like even if the Jinn don't exist, like I guess the movie does make it clear like something again unnatural happens. But even before that, the stress of living in their situation is already an antagonist anyways, right? So yeah, I guess I'm gonna give it a 1 in a day, even if I felt like it's in some ways like the horror aspect again like was sort of like diluted by like the actual like reality of their situation in general. So I guess it works on sort of either front. I just that the more real like you could have removed the Jin aspect, if you will, from this movie, and it still would have worked on that front. So yeah, I'm gonna give it a 1, and that's all. That's as I talked it out and like sort of like puzzled together in my own mind, and that's how I'm gonna come down with the question.
So Doris is actually never attacked by the creature, the Jinn. It is posing as her desire for a mother or a female kind of creature who listens to her, plays with her, promising to get back her doll. Like the big antagonism is that the doll was stolen. And the Jinn appears twice as a male to the mother, once as her husband, both on the phone and in the bed,
Right.
once as the man she failed to, who had died of a heart attack by the either the Jinn or the bomb falling through the apartment block. So, in a sense, it's different emotions of that they're feeling. One is a child who's being ignored, rightfully so because of the war going on. But she wants a loving thing, and then the mother who's just constantly feeling her own failures, and it's being reinforced by the Jinn. So it's different aspects that are being preyed upon there, which is fascinating to me as a villain. But also, I just want to say that there's an implication that Saddam Hussein weaponized Jinns, and that's much scarier than
That's
yellow
scary.
cake uranium. So I'm just saying, George W. Bush, you missed an opportunity here. Anyway, but yeah, I'm going to give it a 1 because I think the psychological attacks that the Jinn was doing was actually very effective. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yep.
And Steve-O, why don't you tell us about our protagonist?
Yeah. So I think it's Shida and maybe Dorsa, but mostly not. I think I would count her as a secondary.
60-40 split, buddy. I would say.
But I think that she does a phenomenal job. Like we were talking earlier, like how the character development in this is one of the strongest points of it, if not the strongest point. And I was looking up her name is, oh man, I'm not going to pronounce this right, but Nargis or Nargis
Let's
or
give credit.
Shidi.
Yeah, let's give credit to the actress either way.
And she's been in a bunch of stuff actually. She was in Hannah, the TV series. She was in Speed Racer, the movie Scott,
Okay.
as an announcer, and Aeon Flux as like an extra or something. Pregnant woman, like almost pregnant woman number 1, but like
Girlfriend
she's
experience.
been around for a while.
Yeah.
And I think she does a phenomenal job in this movie, just fleshing out this character, making it real. Her interactions with her daughter and her husband and like her neighbors are all great, and I gotta give her full credit for really making the character three-dimensional and like just it's a strong character piece showing what she's about, so
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know much more, but I definitely agree. Like, I just add on, like, she impressed me. Like, I was along for the ride, and she did a great job, like, portraying the emotions and like going through the situation. And yeah, so I guess I'll count her like mostly like, and Dorso, like her daughter, like is along for the ride. Like, they somewhat become like dual protagonists, I guess. And her daughter is like there in the forefront as well. So yeah, like all that to say, I'm gonna give it a 1, a stronger 1. Themes in this, I think, stronger than Antagonist. I just said, as we just talked out. But yeah, a 1. So
It's great because it's portrayal of warts and all. This character is flawed. This character is, and it also never to the point where she has some dark secret. It's not about that. It's about a realistic portrayal of a person who talented, intelligent, sort of resentful by the society she's in, and I think she's even aware that she's like you. With a brief moment, the father's on there. You see a deeper connection with the father and the daughter than the mother has to the daughter, and I think she's well aware of that, and that plays into the insecurities there. So I think it's a very complex and realistic portrayal of a flawed human, and I have to give it full marks for that.
The one part, and it's gonna sound like I'm making fun, and I'm not, but I always found it interesting when she went back to her Jane Fonda video, because it said so much. A, that they weren't allowed to have a VCR anyway. B, exercise wear in that kind of a Muslim country. Nah.
As part of the stress though, like that
Yeah.
was her like stress thing, right?
It was a stress thing, but it's also at the time, that Jane Fonda workout was the thing. It was the one of the looks to aspire to be. So it's just like
It was like Americana in a package.
yeah, but it wasn't just that she was doing this, it was the vigor with which she was doing this. And when the tape is destroyed, she is doing it in front of a blank TV screen. I mean, this actress, this character portrayed frustration, some self-loathing in terms of feeling that you just got the sense of this person's frustrations. I think that's the best way to put it. Great character work, outstanding character work, fantastic actress. I'm definitely giving her one.
Yep, right on.
And Ian, how about the supporting characters?
The problem with this film, although it's not necessarily a problem, it goes back to what we talked about narrative here.
By nature.
Yeah, it has the creepy kid. It has the woman who knows what's going on because she's kind of religious. You have the older woman who's kind of a comfort and leaves. Actually, this is about narratively her being the first part of it is her continually being isolated. All of her support structure around her leave. I loved the portrayal of the father for the 10 minutes or so he was on the screen for. The thing is, this is about a woman isolated and the demons that are following her. It's not about the cast around her. And it's just kind of a basic ghost tale cast. So it's probably going to get a default 0 because there was nothing interesting. It's not what I'm going to remember at all about this film. It's a nature of the beast.
Yep, I mean, I agree, and like we've set precedent for this like a number of times at this point, where it just again the nature of the story itself just does not really leave a lot of room for the secondary characters, and what is there, like it's just enough like flush out like to add on like to add to the lore, like give her enough information, but the characters unto themselves just aren't the point. And like while they were fine, like you said, the creepy kid and like the neighbors and like their landlords and all that, like that isn't like the focal point was the mother and daughter, and like even the father too, like you said, he was there for like 10-15 minutes, whatever at best. It's just not the point of the film, like not the focal point of the narrative. So yes, it leaves it in my mind as well, leaves a default 0. So what do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, so it is like it is a lot of that very generic horror movie character, other than the father and the daughter. Dorsa and Iraj is the father's name.
I count Dorsa as a protag more than I count her as a secondary.
Dorsa's actually that cookie cutter thing too, unfortunately. Like she plays the role that the possessed daughter does in all of these films.
Yeah, I guess so. You're right. She doesn't really break too much from that mold.
More than anything else, yeah.
And yeah, like you said, I not to say that I don't like the characters in this, they're just very obviously set up to be horror movie characters. And it is like throughout the entire movie, characters are leaving, even right up until the end, until they're like sitting alone in the bomb shelter by them, the two of them, waiting out a bombing because everyone else is gone. I think it's a really fascinating way to portray that, that isolation. But you're right. It's that those supporting characters are there basically just to leave for the most part.
Yep.
So, they do to some degree flesh out the world, but it doesn't feel, they don't make the world feel real. She does, and I think you're right. I'm probably going to give this a 0 just because they're there to make it a horror movie. She's there to make it a character piece, like it's, this interesting study of her and her relationship with her daughter and her husband and everything. Like, she's the important she's the important cog in that wheel, or in that machine. And so I think you're right. I'm probably gonna give supporting a 0.
See, I consider Dorsa to be a supporting character and basically the only supporting character. And to me, I never found her creepy. I actually had a lot of empathy for her. Maybe that's partially.
Oh no, I'm talking about the kid.
The film itself was like, the creepy cousin or whatever. Like,
oh, you mean the kid that they thought was mute wasn't mute?
Yeah.
Mehdi, I believe was his name.
Yeah, but like I said, I know that you guys probably put Dorsa more into the protagonist. I put her into supporting only because, I feel like it was. I mean, like I said, as probably the oldest, all my cousins were younger females. Like I was kind of had that isolation, and the movie to me, I mean, and this isn't original or anything, but it was how Dorsa came into focus for her mom, that her mom could see past her own failings and actually see her daughter and take her daughter seriously. And I felt a lot of empathy for Dorsa. I thought she was a very solid character. I think the actress did a phenomenal job as well. But I really do think she was kind of important character with regard to the development of her mom, and not that she just served only there to develop her mom's character, but it just felt like this parental relationship where, it's again, it is kind of, I can kind of see where you're at. So maybe this isn't gonna get the strongest of ones, but I would be remiss because it is a mother and it is a parent and child thing where the parent is self-involved to the point where she actually puts her daughter in danger because she refuses to leave, because she refuses to go to her in-laws house. But it is interesting all the ways that Dorsa was trying to get attention from her mom, the way that she didn't have to try with her dad. And I don't know, I found her extremely compelling. And I'm usually with Scott on this one. It's just like children and children actors. That's kind of a hard. That's kind of a. So, go on.
No, just a quick follow up. Like the quick final thing is like, I guess it depends like whether or not you classify Dorsa as a protagonist or secondary. Which for me, I classify her as protagonist. So that's why. That's why I'm going to give it a 0 because I'm shipping her to a different question. But I can see like it's a legit argument to classify her as one or the other. And if you do, then she's probably the most and best and most important secondary character, and which I can see you would have to give it a 1 in that sense. So that's all. Yeah,
I mean, I was invested in her character. I just want to let you know that for the lack of articulation for half the stuff I'm trying to say, I was invested in her as a character rather than a plot device.
Yeah, certainly. And
which is usually what children are.
Yeah, I'm saying it depends. It just depends where you ship her in terms of questions, and that's going to depend on your score. So.
I mean, you're right. At the very end, they both work together to escape from this. She reaches out and pulls her mother up from the thing. So she does have a kind of a character arc too. They're both selfish people who need each other at the end. But yeah.
All right. And Scott, that goes to you with dialogue.
So of course this is a foreign film. It's all subtitled, and I mean, that's not an insult. Like, in fact, I think we said this before a number of times. One in cases of doing films like this that have subtitles, I actually think the dialogue was pretty good. Like, there's some good subtle stuff. Like it was all organic, Chris, to me, like believable, and like especially like I'm sorry, since Tommy, I'm still something from you. When they had like a parental argument, if you will, right? Like there was some harsh stuff where like it's just some like hardcore realism where even coming on from going on from the very first scene where she gets rejected, like we're not going to accept you back in university because of your past, of your political history, and her husband says, "Oh, maybe it's for the best." She's like, "Well, you just like kind of shat on my dreams. You're a doctor. My dream was to be that. Like I want to do that." And like, oh, it's okay if you are, but like, but because I'm me, because I'm a woman, and also like everything else, like, oh, my dreams are like shattered. Like, oh, it's for the best, right? Like that was some hardcore realist, again, like down to earth stuff. And then when it sort of like somewhat evolved from that, or at least when it bent into the supernatural stuff, that made sense too. Like, yeah, you're right. Like one of you, Steve, one of you mentioned like, oh, my next door, my upstairs neighbor, the other woman who like, I know about the gin history. Like, I mean, tell you like whatever, like whatever, like. But that like it was fine because it made sense, and like at least it gave her some information, like, and it didn't feel exposition-y in the way that it could have felt in other cases, and handled differently. So yeah, in general, I think it worked, and especially in fact, again, like when the mother daughter thing, they got strained. Like, oh, I'm sorry for your doll. Like, don't, you haven't found my doll yet. Like, I'm working on, like, you're a kid, all right. Like, I'm trying to take care of you. Like, you're sick, and like like all that stuff like worked. Like it made sense, and it felt reasonable. Again, it felt realistic. So I'm giving it a lot of credit, and I'm gonna give it a 1, and that's all.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it was pretty damn good dialogue. The part that you were talking about, Scott, where it's actually like fairly like right before her husband leaves, she's trying to convince him not to go because he's getting sent to like one of the more dangerous areas.
No.
And he's like, I could lose my license. And she's like, oh, well, it's a travesty if you lose your license, but for me, it's for the best if I don't get mine.
Exactly.
And like that was one of the best scenes of dialogue, I thought, and like a really compelling argument between the two of them just by
and ties into themes just real quickly as well, right?
And by how much emotion came out of that. I thought that they did a really good job of putting that in there. It reminded me a little bit of like if what was a Marriage Story had been set during a war, like almost. There's some of their arguments, and like it's I really like the dialogue in this. I thought it was really well done. I mean, maybe even despite some of the little like asides of like, oh, it's like having to learn what is haunting them or whatever through some like sage old woman next door. Otherwise, I thought the character development parts of this were terrific, and I got to give it strong credit for that.
Yeah, just my final thought is it could have come off as more stilted, and like I think they did a good job of it just organically having it all there. Whether it was just realistic, again, like husband and wife and daughter like shit, and then supernatural stuff like on top of that. So yeah,
I think it's credit to this work that a number of us, and myself included, said that I'm more interested in the character work in this than I was in the horror movie. I was actually, again, disappointed when the horror came up. I wanted to see more of this a family dynamic.
You want it to be a separation again.
Yeah, oh, that's my favorite movie. But the fact that I was so invested in the opening act of a horror film is amazing. I mean, generally, it's that's the worst part of it. So yeah, I'll just give full credit for dialogue.
I think you guys said everything with regard to dialogue, and maybe I'll save what I'm about to say for dialogue for style, since that is me next. But I agree with you all. Strong natural dialogue. I mean, you guys pointed out some really great stuff. I have nothing else beyond that.
By the way, real quick before we go on to the next one, did it start out for everybody else on a dub and you had to change it to sub with
Nope.
Nope.
Oh my god, I was so annoyed. Like it was like terrible American accents the first like 10 seconds. I was like, absolutely not. Turn this off.
Devo settings blow, but yeah, it was totally like subtitled. It was fine for me, buddy.
Yeah, I wonder if that's your TV because
tell
you
ya.
said that before. Make sure you switch.
It's happened to me before. I mean, I think it all depends on how you have subtitles set up on your
Uh-huh.
Netflix.
But we also watch it through. Oh no, do we watch it on Netflix?
What's on
Oh,
Netflix?
okay, yeah.
It's on Netflix. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know.
Anyway,
Okay, so that goes to me with style. And speaking of the first act, the first scene of this film, when she's being rejected by university for her past political affiliations, while they're talking, in the background, you see an explosion.
Mhm.
And he's barely notices it.
barely registers with.
She just kind of looks over, and it's like you have that sense that there's that other. It's out there. It's not really affecting me. And the more this film goes on, the more claustrophobic it becomes. That's God's. But that, I mean, I think starting the film off in front of a picture window that sets the theme for her character, and having that the war is looming over them, that they can look out and kind of be nonplussed about something out there blowing up. There's a couple things I really liked when they got to the supernatural elements, the cloth sheet,
Yeah.
blanket.
Yep.
I loved that.
It was well done, effective.
Yeah, motif.
Great.
I mean, if you're going to do that, I mean, stylistically, I think this film works in a lot of ways, and I think the increasing more claustrophobic is one of the biggest things about that. But I do like the way they played the supernatural instead of going like CG and all that stuff. They had this very simple thing, so I'm giving style a 1.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Like, of course, since it was on you first, yeah. I mean, I guess the budget was pretty low because like it was basically just an apartment, like a couple of like apartment like parts of it, and yeah, and that did add to feeling like claustrophobically like that whole atmosphere, and yeah, it really worked quite well, and even like when the missile like hit, like like when it like comes down through the apartment and like is, and then like as shattering affecting the rest of the building structure, like that was an important thing both narratively to the characters, and yeah, just in general, like I said, like you said, Chris, the claustrophobic feel, like they kept it like small scale, which really worked quite well, and like they're just trapped in their apartment more or less. They have to run out of the basement and this and that, but even all of that still felt like it was very, again, like the way it was framed and so forth. I don't remember much of a soundtrack, so I'll bring that up. You guys can maybe speak more. I don't remember the music very well, but regardless, the cinematography and like for the feel and the angle they were going for, I think they nailed it, and I'm gonna give it a 1.
Yeah, I feel the same way about the music. I don't remember it too much. If there was much.
They had a couple nice
was-
little 80s songs. They had Don't Go by Yazoo.
I mean, when she watched a Jane Fonda tape, yeah, sure, but like I don't remember much else.
I was looking for what the budget was. I didn't see it immediately, but what I did stumble upon in IMDb while I was looking for that is one of the goofs, which I always like to read. The cupboards in Dorsey's room have remnants of stickers on them. One of the stickers has an image of SpongeBob SquarePants, which didn't make a first TV appearance until the 90s, 1999. So that's kind of funny. But yeah, like I thought that the everything you mentioned, Chris, that scene with the sheet in terms of like the ghost is done really well.
Pretty fine too, yeah.
I think that actually most appearances of the ghost or of the Jinn are pretty solid. Like just the quick moving, don't show too much for most of the movie, and make it quick because the more you show, the less scary it is. Like I think they did a good job of that and making it kind of an at the fringes, at the edges type of monster. And I thought that worked pretty well. On top of that, there is this, as you mentioned, this sense of like claustrophobia and alienation from everybody else that like really sets in maybe like halfway through the movie and just gets worse and worse and like more intense and more intense throughout until they escape. Um, and then there's this kind of nice scene right up until it goes back to the book and the head of the doll. Um, but yeah, I think that the style is really pretty solid. The cinematography is good. The like all the settings are really well dressed, and the atmosphere of the war, of the war that looms over them, it's called Under the Shadow, and for good reason. It really does make you feel as though these people are under the shadow of a war that they're not really interested in, and don't want. And yeah, so I'm gonna give it a very strong one.
I don't have much else to add to that. I was thinking of something. I think some people going in expecting a horror movie will be disappointed by or kind of a modern-ish horror movie will be disappointed by it. It is slow paced. It's the effects are limited. There's one scene where they have when the fake Dorsa is under the bed and the mouth creature comes up, but beyond that you don't see much at all. But if you kind of appreciate that kind of stylistic element, it's an effective horror movie. A couple of jump scares that pissed me off.
I mean, there were like two or three, I guess.
Yeah, but
Were they effective? No, but like,
yeah.
I appreciate their intent, I guess.
But overall, I think it was, and I think Jane Fonda was a great choice. Because here's the thing: is like oftentimes they'll overload you with if it's a period piece, overload you with. They have basically one thing,
References and shit.
which is a character building trait. So they just limit it to that, like a VCR and Jane Fonda tape, and it worked.
Mm-hmm.
And I was gonna say for music, they had the video for "Don't Go" by Yaz in the United States, Yazoo.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I didn't take that as a wink to the audience, but I could just see it as like the director's like, it's the '80s. I love this song. I have no proof that this is what went on. But if it was my piece, I would have been like, yeah, I'm gonna put something. I'm gonna put a song I like in there.
Sure.
But
They
yeah,
could've had
Ian.
it.
But yeah, Ian, you're right. Going with Jane Fonda was a smart idea.
Yeah, it worked.
And I didn't notice SpongeBob SquarePants, but that leaves you off, Steve-O. Would you recommend Under the Shadow?
Yeah, I absolutely would. I think it's a pretty solid horror movie. If you're looking for a good foreign language film to check out, this is a good one. And um, yeah, I mean, I would highly recommend watching it. Check it out.
I don't know if I would absolutely would. I'm gonna give it a 1, Chris. Like officially score me a 1. Yes, it's worth the watch. It's a good movie. It's well done. For many of the reasons we just said. I'm not sure if I personally watched it again or like maybe I'll give it one more viewing. But if somebody said to me, "Hey, there's a movie called Under the Shadow. Have you seen it? Like, should I watch it?" I'm like, you know what? Yeah, it is solid enough and it works for what it is, and it's. I could name for you horror movies and movies in general that are lesser than it. So yeah, it's gonna work, and I'm gonna give it a 1. I'll officially recommend it.
Unfortunately, I have too many caveats that go into this as a recommendation, and so that's probably going to be on a 0 for this because this is a very specific movie for a very specific type of audience. General horror movie fans who are not into subtitles will not like this. General horror movie fans who are into subtitles might not like this because it's not as flashy as more modern horror is. I don't know. I just think that it's a very niche. It's a niche film. I liked it, but I don't know if
That's a smaller circle of recommendation. You're saying? I get it.
I did recommend this, and I do recommend this. It is a film I would see again. Probably it'd be on one of my reoccurring things. Like, as I said, on when Steve and I were on the Slackers podcast, I mean, out of horror movies of the last decade, probably The Black Coat's Daughter is my every year watch.
Sure.
But this is not going to be like in the level of Black Coat's Daughter or The Witcher or something like that. But
you're saying it's still worth a watch, and I think
it's still worth a watch, and it would be something I'd tell you, be like, hey, give it a watch. If you don't like subtitles, go with the bad dubbing, but try to go with the subtitles. But yeah, I'd definitely give it a 1.
Yeah. Right
and so that leaves us. Ian gave it the lowest score at the 7. And Scott and Steve-O gave it an 8. You all agreed that gave supporting a 0. I gave supporting a 1. We all gave plot a 2, and we all recommended except for Ian. So that gives us an aggregate score of 8. So the film gets an 8.
Maybe it's a little higher than I would say, like arbitrarily offhand, but like I still think it's a strong film. And again, like you're right, like the caveats that you said apply. But if you're okay with that, then yeah, it's definitely worth a watch. And yeah, right on.
Yeah, I consider. I mean, like I consider in a group review, 8's probably about 7.5 to 8 would be about where I expected us to fall. So
Yep.
Maybe it's only because I know you guys so well. I don't know. And that is a compliment, believe it or not. Does anybody? What's that?
Nope. Go ahead. Wrap it up, buddy.
For those who aren't watching Ian's, all right. Okay, if nobody has
nothing. For those who aren't watching, he was making hand gestures, and then Chris made the same hand gesture when he said, "For those who aren't watching."
And now you know.
And now you're all caught up.
Happening. Yeah.
Steve's the narrator. Okay, so my name's Chris Morgan. I've been here with Jonathan Ian Manzer.
Have a good night, everyone.
Scott Thurlow.
Go watch The Wishmaster.
And Stephen Hermosi.
Hoping to be over the shadow.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
And happy early Halloween. We'll see you next time. Good night and cheers.
Editing and engineering by Christopher Morgan. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates. Or mods?